Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your host, singular, Buddy Sotelo Esquire. But we have our other two very frequent commentators and hosts of this, emeritus host of this show, and that's Jonathan Schwartz from Slam Magazine and Benny Scala from Dan and Benny in the Ring, as well as many other various projects. You're a busy man these days, so I appreciate you doing this as a second half of the makeup show where I lost the
lost episode.
Yeah, the lost episode, exactly. Somewhere it will show up. Some.
It was a good one too. Hopefully, it does show up.
Does this make me the Margaret Hamilton of Sesame Street for the show?
I don't even know that. I don't get that. I don't get that reference.
I am willing to bet Benny does.
Okay,
I know who Margaret Hamilton is.
So Margaret Hamilton famously played the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. Many years after the movie,
coffee commercials after that.
Yeah, and she appeared on an episode of Sesame Street many years after that in character as the Wicked Witch of the West.
Did not know that.
They tested that episode in front of children who were so absolutely terrified by this shrieking green lady that they canned the episode and it never saw the light of day.
Wow.
And that's a heel for the ages. Jeez, how many years after that was? Because The Wizard of Oz was 1939. Had to be at least like 35 years later.
In fairness, like it's the Flying Monkeys that did it for me.
They were part of the heel faction.
So yeah,
they were the Dominic Mysterio of the group.
I was just wondering why the Tin Man didn't take his axe and just really go to town on all those damn monkeys. I mean, the guy is the only one with a weapon.
And he had no heart, so you'd think he'd be completely remorseless about it.
Yeah.
Had the Tin Man done DDPY, he would have had the flexibility to do that. But
yeah, no, he was. But you'd think he would just be a mechanical monster. He'd be ready to with an axe just go ahead and take out Wicked Witch. But no, he was.
He worked stiff, literally.
Absolutely. So anyway, we can get your comments on Billy Jack Haynes and the situation that's going on. I know that not much has been really released since the original arrest, but you had talked about it last week, and those comments were lost. And Jonathan, as an attorney, maybe you have some thoughts as to what's going on with Billy Jack Haynes and just what kind of bizarre career he had both in wrestling and out.
You know what? I'll defer to Benny first because he's actually had something to say about this before. So
yeah, and I mean, I could be all. We all have our takes on everything, and I guess the truth will come out eventually. I mean, the guy for 6 years was a megastar in the wrestling business. Very short, career on top. Started in '82, I think, when he was already almost 30 years old. I think he actually did some prison time before he started wrestling. But it spent time in the Portland territory. I think in World Class, of course, the WWF. I think a little bit of time in Crockett. Wrestled on top wherever he went, but just had this apparently had this proclivity of just wearing out his welcome really, really quickly with these promoters, which is a shame. I mean, by 1988, I think he was wrestling for the Indies. I think he might have even went back to Oregon, tried to start his own promotion, and then I think eventually he went back to Don Owen.
It collapsed in 3 months.
By the time he went back to Don Owen, I think the Portland territory is pretty much dead in the water. But this is really weird because I believe his wife is 15 years older than him. And to me, it was one of two things. Either he really truly loved this woman, or she was filthy rich. And from all accounts, she was not filthy rich. I do think he dearly loved this woman, but I also think that Billy Jack Haynes, because of a number of reasons, number one, he apparently had a horrible childhood. Number two, he's done a lot of drugs in his lifetime. And number three, he took a hell of a lot of bumps while he wrestled. And, you mix all that into a cocktail. And he wasn't all there. And you could tell by some of his later interviews, he was way out there. And I think, and I believe that in that area, Jack Kevorkian did a lot of business there back in the 90s maybe. And I think in his own demented way, this was Billy Jack's way of taking this woman, because she, was suffering apparently from advanced dementia, his way of taking her out of her misery. I mean, was it the right way to do it? Of course not. But I do think he to some extent, he had good intentions. Again, I could be all wrong, though.
Jonathan, your thoughts?
I think that it's premature to know exactly what his motives were if they ever become publicly known. I think that first off, it's a terrible, sad, tragic
Absolutely.
thing, both for his wife and to an extent for him as well. I mean, I've seen the same shoot interviews that I'm sure you guys both have. He's clearly been dealing with some significant mental health issues for a very, very, very long time. In some of those tapes, he'd implicated himself in a number of murders and drug deals gone bad and just all kinds of out there stuff, including cases that had a fair bit of notoriety, whether or not this is actually the case or just a product of his imagination. I think that the thing that I can't seem to escape based on what we've seen so far is I don't know what the prospect for a conviction would be in this case. Up here, we call it not criminally responsible by reason of mental defect. So that's basically our version of the insanity defense.
Right.
And the test for that is generally whether the person, in a criminal act, there's two parts. I think I've mentioned this before. There's what's called actus reus, which is the physical action, and there's what's called mens rea, which is the accused state of mind at the time that he commits the act. An insanity defense, or a not criminally responsible kind of defense, works where the individual is incapable of appreciating that his actions at the time, he doesn't know right from wrong.
Versus he knows it's wrong and does it anyway.
Correct.
That's the mens rea.
Exactly. And I mean, obviously we weren't there. Who knows what's actually going to be introduced as evidence? Who knows if it even gets this far? But certainly from what has been made public about him over the last 10, 15, even 20 years now, it wouldn't surprise me if things ultimately went down that route and he winds up in a hospital somewhere, hopefully getting the help that he needs. Not that it's any great consolation to the family. As an example of how that's worked, even in a wrestling context, you may remember several years ago, Vern Gagne had been placed in a senior's residence. He was also suffering from advanced dementia, and for whatever reason, he took it upon himself to actually assault and body slam a fellow resident in the facility, who later died from his injuries. And Vern was ultimately found not criminally responsible. I don't even think that went to trial. They just acknowledged that there was no reasonable prospect of conviction. I think something similar might have happened, different circumstances, but in Jimmy Snuka's case as well, that he was so far gone by the time that he would have gone to trial that there was nothing to. There was the person who allegedly had committed the act just wasn't there anymore.
And let me throw some additional legalese out to the crowd while we're at it, and that is mens rea doesn't always mean that you're not guilty. And there are acts that just by committing them, or if they're in violation of a statute, that already counts as the mens rea that is necessary for conviction under a number of different statutes. So what I'm trying to get to is the mercy killing thing. And I don't know Oregon law inside and out, but there may be, like, if you don't do certain steps that are necessary to set up a mercy killing, then that becomes, by definition, a murder. And so, that I'm not sure of it, but I think that's where they're trying to convict him on. And I mean, he's no doctor. He has no particular medical standing to be able to do these sort of assisted suicides. And assisted suicides.
Sorry, I'm just going to step in for a sec, because it could be that this is a massive difference between U.S. and Canadian law, and I'm far from an expert on Canadian law when it comes to this stuff. But medical assistance in dying is not an individual who takes pity on someone, just decides to blow their head off with a shotgun, which is basically the facts, at least as presented thus far.
You might put some cyanide in their tapioca pudding.
Yeah, and it's not something that a court would see, even in. I can't think of a case where even the most well-meaning attempt, once it kind of gets into the justice system,
right,
courts are very disinclined for really clear policy reasons to allow people to kill other people and then claim, well, they wanted it, it was a mercy killing. Maybe that happens in point of fact more often than we'd know, but when we're talking about a legal assisted death, what we're talking about is individuals with diagnosed medical conditions, although the parameters vary from place to place, and it's provided in a controlled setting by a healthcare provider. That's part of what made the Kevorkian cases legally as compelling as they were, that at least for the time, the argument went that he basically ticked off every box as possible to ensure the consent of the people who he assisted in death, and that he tried to hasten their death as humanely as possible. Whether or not people agree with it or not, whether or not you think that's ultimately his motive, or if he was truly a bad person, I'm kind of trying to steer clear of that. But I think we need to draw a really clear distinction between medical assistance in dying and what happened here. That's not to say Billy Jack Haynes didn't think that way, but
right,
whether he thought he was doing the right thing or not kind of goes into the capacity defense,
right?
At least in my view.
Agree.
I'm not sure.
Real expertise on this.
Given how hard his mind is already to interpret, it may, we may never really know the truth behind it.
I don't think you get to an assisted death argument in this case. I think that if this goes anywhere, it pretty much starts and finishes with whether he's capable even of standing trial.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think he's going to be capable of standing trial. That's my.
You think he will be?
Yeah, I think he will be.
Interesting.
So we'll have more to talk about when that happens. Anyway, transitioning onto that, which was my question, my original question, more important than Billy Jack Haynes, which is that who in history had the best rolling headlock, in your opinion? That one where you grab the guy here and you do that move where you roll the guy's head around in the headlock there? No? You guys don't have an opinion?
I thought you meant like a headlock into like a flip, into a...
Oh, it's just the takeover.
You're talking like when the side headlock where they're kind of grinding it?
Yes, the headlock, yes.
And
where is that gone as a move? Do you remember? That used to be a great spot that everyone used to love.
That was wasn't that more of a babyface move on a heel?
Both. I mean, because then the heel would do it, but he would fake the punch, and we would move away from the ref the whole time, or he'd grab the hair,
right,
and the ref wouldn't see, or the mask, or he'd try to mess with the good guy's mask. It was the luchador.
I don't know. You got me on that one.
So you don't.
I'm going to go with Rick Martel actually, because I remember him doing that.
Really, I think the best guy to do that was Ivan Putski. Because he was really into his arms. His arm thing was a big deal. He used to work that rolling headlock, for like a spot. I remember.
Yeah, I mean, now that you mentioned, like under that definition of a rolling headlock, yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah, he would, and he would fight some really slow matches. Forgotten is Ivan Putski in like the liturgy of professional wrestling, and like what an Ivan Putski match really.
Well, how many moves did the guy have? Really, honestly, I mean, 8. He had that, and he had the Polish hammer, and I'm trying to think what else in between.
Well, and he would do the test of strength stuff.
Yeah, I think the bear hug as well.
And the bear hug as well, and then like the shoulder block.
There was one point late in his career where they brought shortly after they brought superstar Billy Graham in for that mid-'80s. Really kind of sad babyface run that he had, the last one that he had with the WWF at the time. And around the same time, they brought in Ivan Putski. And between the two of them, if they moved any slower, they'd be moving in reverse. And McMahon, I guess, had them teamed together, which at the time was supposed to mean something to fans because they'd had a tremendous feud back when both were in their prime. But they weren't in their prime, and BWWF at the time had done an awful lot of work to try and convince people that wrestling didn't exist pre-Hulkamania.
Former.
Unnaturally big, shall we say. Older wrestlers in dueling bear hugs with whoever the enhancement guys of the day were. And they teamed them up for a little bit before Graham got hurt again and Putski decided to go back to Texas.
Yeah, he was probably in his, I would say, maybe 45 by then, and he had gotten into competitive bodybuilding in the early to mid 80s. So, I mean, he was ripped. I mean, he was jacked. Yeah. Didn't have that like huge mass anymore, but I mean, very, very well defined. But yeah, I don't think they really gave him his proper due as far as what he was pre Vince Jr.
I remember reading once in like the early 80s that they said that Ivan Putski's Polish Hammer was considered the most effective finishing move in professional wrestling at the time, where it had the most number of 3 counts after it was administered.
As far as like times administered versus, kickouts?
Yeah.
Probably like in the high 90s, I would guess.
Yeah.
That was also at a time when a finisher was effective.
A finisher, exactly.
But like more recently, I remember when Chris Masters first came in and he was doing the straight up kind of bodybuilder gimmick. He used it not as a finisher, but in his repertoire. And Sheamus too, when he came up with his kind of similar, again, kind of gimmick, used it mid-match. And both of them wound up actually injuring their opponents with him. Sheamus actually busted open Stevie Richards' face on it.
Yeah, that was a mess.
Yeah, no,
I remember that.
It's one of those things that like no one would sell for it now, as a finisher, and Putski made a career out of it. That was his finishing move for so many years.
Almost like a very fast double heart punch.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think anybody would sell the heart punch anymore, which I think is an absolute shame.
Yeah.
That was Super Destroyer 2000's finishing move.
You got an Ox and you got the Stan Man
the heart punch. We wanted to make a tribute so much to old school wrestling that he had the heart. Mark Smith did the heart punch as his finisher.
It's one of my favorite moves to do to my kids.
Do you do the whole thing with the arm, like the one arm? And
I've done arm over, hammerlock.
Wow.
They just giggle, but
well, hopefully
that's Stelling's lost art anyway.
Yes. Well, look, you have a long way to go to reach Fritz von Erich territory. Let's just say after watching the movie, I'll just say that's all I'll say about that. But and speaking of complicated fathers, let's have a brief discussion about Vince McMahon and everything that is in the news about Vince and the other things that have been revealed. I mean, you've been on relatively recently to talk about it, Jonathan, but we didn't really get Benny's thoughts about it and where you think the WWE is going to go. Do you think that TKO is going to want some money back, considering they got handed kind of a ticking time bomb with everything that Vince, sold them kind of a bill of goods that isn't maybe really worth $5 billion. And there's
I mean, I think at this point, and I've made the analogy, like I know that the WWE is trying to eliminate as much Vince McMahon from their footage as possible. But how do you do that? It's like taking mitochondria out of a cell. I mean, he is the WWE for the last 40 years. So how do you reverse that? I think that's impossible. But I think they're going to, completely distance themselves from him. I don't think we'll ever see him again.
It's a little ironic that Vince McMahon has made a career out of erasing people out of the WWE
Right.
when they displeased him. Now it's the WWE that wants to erase him and, turn about.
How do you do that, though?
With wrestling lysosomes.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a mitochondria reference. I had to go for more cell puns.
Okay.
No, that was my whole biology repertoire. So you know,
I live by the credo that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Lysosomes, yeah. Oh, geez, 1970 all over again, 10th grade biology. But I mean, now everybody's coming out of the woodwork. Now, you got this. What was her name? Cara Pipia, who supposedly was a good friend of Ashley Massaro, who went on some kind of talk show and was saying how Stephanie knew that what happened in Kuwait, and then Ashley's own daughter, I guess, denied the allegation. So right now it's a shit show. I really
the Bella
think
twins also wanted to
and
throw
John
it.
Laurinaitis is a victim. I mean,
Yes.
it's just insane at this point. I thought after Janelle Grant filed the complaint, though, I thought Vince only had 21 days to answer it, and that's already lapsed.
He must. Well, he might have filed it, and it's not made public yet. That's a possibility. So,
or maybe can they get an extension on that?
Probably, you can get in America. You can always get an extension the first time out for any reason, pretty much. You could just say, the cat ate my brief, before I submitted it, and the judge will give you the first one. And there may be the judge may seal it, for different reasons and not make it public. But I don't think that there's a way because it's a civil suit, it's going to wind up, there's any kind of privilege that I can think of that Vince McMahon would get special treatment on this or be able to get this from being made public. So it should be, filed relatively soon. And
if he can run out the clock to the next presidential election, he has a shot.
Yeah, then Trump can add him to the many, pardons that he plans to.
I mean, does anybody really think he's ever going to spend a day in jail? I don't. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think
wouldn't. It's a civil case.
No, but but he's also being pursued by the feds.
Right. That's
investigated. We'll see what that would show. And the other thing, and I mentioned this last week, is that from a criminal standpoint, there's a much higher burden of proof. All the plaintiff in the civil case has to show is that it's more likely than not that one, Vince did what he's being accused of, and two, that the plaintiff suffered harm that can be compensated by money as a result of that.
However, and I pointed out this last week too, which is that in a civil case, because your freedom isn't on the line, you can't claim the Fifth Amendment protection against testifying against yourself, okay? So things that he says in the civil trial can be used against him in the criminal trial, if there is one. So there's ways that his own statements can be used against him because they're admitted in court. And that's something, yes.
So I don't know if you would necessarily know this, but when I was listening to all of that, I was reminded of the Bill Cosby cases. And in his criminal trial, one of the things that was used against him and basically really helped to convict him was his own prior statements, which had been made.
But those statements were immunity.
Right, but it was under immunity for the purpose of a civil trial, was my understanding.
I don't know. I think that they granted him immunity. I think they granted him immunity from the very first time they started talking to him because they were dopes. They were idiots, and they didn't know what the hell they were doing. And they were kind of caught in the celebrity. Look, the way that in the United States, if you're a celebrity, you pretty much can do anything you want, and the authorities are going to botch it up pretty badly. I mean, look at all the the celebrities that have walked free from the criminal justice system. From Ronnie Spector's about the only one that we've been able to apprehend, but otherwise it's been from Robert Blake to O.J. Simpson to we have some other I'm blanking on some of the other criminals that we fail to get convictions on, but
they got Harvey Weinstein.
Oh yeah, well yeah, he and we'll never find out about some of the other people who took care of themselves, so to speak. I mean, Vince had $5 billion, and he could have just written a check. He just could have probably found the change in his couch or in the glove compartment of his car, and just paid the $3 million
From a civil suit perspective, he still can. The number of cases that would actually go to trial are minuscule.
Yeah, but it's too late now. I mean, the cat's out of the bag. Everyone knows about it. I mean, but
are you saying that he should have? I mean, had he done it out of his own personal funds?
Yes.
Yeah.
No one would ever heard anything about it, and he just made $5 billion. Selling his shares from the WWE. Out to the new conglomerate, the TKO, and so.
Or had he paid her in one lump sum as well? Because I think then.
Yeah, he could have just done that and just been over with, and trying to hide it inside of the company's payments, so that it was within the WWE's umbrella, that was actually making the payments and not him out of his own money. Is just both hubris and could be the thing that lands him in actual jail, because doing that with a publicly run company is an FCC violation of a large order.
And there's the part where arguably one of the things that precipitated filing this lawsuit was she had signed a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for payment of a sum of money by McMahon or by WWE, and he didn't pay the bill.
Because when TKO found out about it, they cut it off because it was coming out of the WWE's company funds and not out of Vince's. It would have never been cut off if Vince had paid it himself. And it's just amazing that a guy that can build this huge empire and manipulate all these people and all this stuff would do something so. I mean, when they make the movie about it, which they will, and it'll probably have to be like one of these Peter Jackson, like 3-part epics, and the 4th part will have to probably be made into 2 movies.
I thought you were going to go with the X-rated puppet show like Meet the Feebles.
Yeah. No, not an X-rated puppet show. Yeah, certain parts of it they probably should do with puppets because it'd be too disgusting to show in person. You do the supposed stuff with Brock Lesnar. You do that should be done. Puppets, animation, something like that. I don't think any actor wants to have to reenact that scene. Although I wonder who they would get to be a young Vince McMahon and who they would cast, in the whatever role. I mean, hey, that was.
I'm going to butcher the guy's name, but Barry Keoghan.
Really?
The guy from Saltburn.
I haven't seen it. So I have to check that out. But anyway, also what we have here in the background there is the fact that it is Ric Flair's 75th birthday, and that is another topic of discussion. So. Ric Flair being 75. First of all, did either of you think Ric Flair would live to age 75?
No. Not given the past 10 years. No. I'm shocked.
Yeah, no. If you told, even in the 80s, you had told me that like Ric Flair, he'll live past age 75. I would have bet you like several.
Given his lifestyle, yeah, probably. I would agree with you.
Yes. First of all, he's lucky enough to survive that one plane crash. That broke his back. and then to get in and wrestle as much as he has. I mean, he was in wrestling during the absolutely wildest time that wrestling was, known for. And he was one of the guys who was the wildest guy out of all of that. Sort of the Mick Jagger of pro wrestling, if you think about it in some ways.
More Keith Richards at this point.
More Keith Richards.
Yeah,
at this
good point.
Yeah, because Mick does take care of himself a little bit more, but Keith Richards is a modern miracle.
I think Mick is 83 with a 37-year-old girlfriend at this moment.
Unbelievable.
And a 256-year-old liver.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she loves him for his personality.
Or maybe it's like 15 minutes old. We don't know. He might, be just like swapping them out. Like
let's not start off with the adrenochrome stuff.
Yeah. No, but maybe he has a refrigerator just full of livers that he just that he just goes and sews them in. There's like Velcro. There's like Velcro inside of him, so they can just stick it in there real quick and rip one out.
Or like disposable livers, maybe.
Yes. Oh man. But Ric Flair. It's amazing. He's still around. He's outlived a number of his counterparts, and he's had some rough times. He's had a heart attack in the ring, right? Didn't he have
that disaster of his last match a couple of years ago?
Yeah, no, but he also had before, didn't he?
Oh, I think he met that last match a couple of summers ago.
I know that was pretty bad, and yet he still says he would consider doing something in the ring.
Of course he would, because somebody will pay him.
And he said that he would be perfectly content to die in the ring.
Yeah,
and I at this point I don't disagree.
Wow. Well, but let's maybe think about something more positive. What are your thoughts on just Ric Flair overall? He gets moved down. There was one time I think everyone thought he was the best wrestler in the history of professional wrestling. But, that was in the 80s and early 90s. Do we think that way now in 2024? Jonathan?
I think that he's still absolutely up there. I think if you watch his matches, particularly his stuff from the 80s through to the early 90s, it still stands up. It's still evergreen. I think, as with anybody else, time catches up with you in terms of his own skills and in terms of how wrestling's evolved around him. But even for that, until his matches really strained credibility, he was always fun to watch in the ring. And I think from a communication standpoint, I think he's still probably all-time top 5 promos ever. I don't think there are very many who did it better.
In terms of a consummate, back in the day territory, NWA touring world champion, nobody was better than Ric Flair. Traveled, literally probably wrestled, 350 times a year, close to it, everywhere. And he wasn't wrestling 5-minute matches. He was wrestling a lot of 60-minute Broadways, and they were good quality matches. And his mic skills, he's on the Mount Rushmore as far as the mic. I think even as far as the way that he wrestled the match, now his behavior outside of the ring, was more of an enhancement talent type of thing. But, I think one of the best champions ever.
You look at the success he had both in NWA and WCW and the WWF, that he was, a big deal everywhere he went. And yet, he fought literally all over the world in every spot. If you look at Roman Reigns and the lack of defenses, Roman Reigns he had like 13 last year?
I think 11.
11?
And I think he's got in his whole reign, he's got less than 50.
Ric Flair would defend that title in 2 weeks.
2 months.
Not 2 months. In 2 weeks, he would have 11 matches.
Yeah, but I'm saying 50, in total.
Yeah. I mean, he would, and so it just his schedule was so relentless, and yet, one thing about Ric Flair is that he made that transition from old '70s punch and kick and choke type wrestling to high flying, extreme, big move, high spot wrestling, from the 80s and even into the 90s, really, was a viable force and fought every style of wrestling pretty much, like Terry Funk, and Bret Hart, a guy that fought every style of wrestler you could possibly imagine, from, big behemoth guys and guys like Andre the Giant and Bam Bam Bigelow and Vader, to guys like Rey Mysterio Jr. and Greg the Hammer Valentine and Roddy Piper and just
and I think the important thing too is that he looked great fighting all of those guys, whether they were smaller and more athletic or lumbering giants. But he also made all of them look good, no matter what their level was.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, you can watch Flair against, like, just his work in NWA and WCW. You can watch him against Ricky Steamboat, where one of the few people who basically can match Flair hold for hold, move for move, bump for bump. But then you can watch him in a match against Lex Luger, where he clearly has to carry the guy, especially at that stage of Luger's career, and made Luger look like $1 million. There was a pay-per-view, I think it was in Baltimore, where Flair and Luger headlined, and it's the best Luger ever looked. And the one time and this was on Flair, he was so good as a heel at the height of his powers at that point that it's the one time in my life I ever cheered for Lex Luger. And he winds up getting screwed out of the title because the Maryland Athletic Commission decides he's bleeding too much.
That's funny that was just the cover. That was just the finish of Super Clash 3, Jerry Lawler versus Kerry Von Erich match with the bleeding too much. The match has to be stopped.
And it's always the baby face that's bleeding too much while he's in the process. Because didn't Luger have Flair
he had him up to the torture rack?
Yeah.
And same with...
You couldn't wait 13 seconds till the guy submitted.
Kerry had Jerry Lawler in the claw on the mat, and they stopped it because of blood. So, yes.
Gagne killed 2 territories that night.
Yes, that was... Well, I just
3,
watched
actually.
it. So I just watched it, so it's fresh in my mind. I just kind of wanted to see a Kerry Von Erich match after seeing the Iron Claw, so I hopped over to YouTube and watched that to just remind me of, like, I don't know, I still have a soft spot in my heart for AWA. There's the AWA and World Class are 2, like, old feds I really love going back and watching the videos of, because that's the stuff that really harkens me back to, like, my greatest times watching wrestling was, like, coming home at lunchtime and watching ESPN and seeing the AWA on it, or they would have a Global or World Class, and it just reminds me of a lot of that sort of stuff.
Well, back in the 60s and the 70s, they were every bit as equal of the WWF and the NWA. I mean, they were first class promotion.
Well, they ran from the NWA first, if I remember correctly. And they were
the NWA came first, but the AWA.
Yeah, they created in 1960 was AWA, and I think it was Gagne because he couldn't get.
He wasn't going to get the
Right, and they pretty much ran the San Francisco territory for a very long time. The AWA was really SF, and Oakland would be where they would run the WWE.
That's post Ray Stevens, though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, post Ray Stevens, but the AWA was mostly where you had the Cow Palace. that's where you had most of the matches run, and the AWA had most of the shows there. And then,
to me, one of the greatest matches of all time took place in the Cow Palace. That was Bruno versus Ray Stevens, 2 out of 3 falls.
Yeah, but what year was that? What year?
67, I think. And Bruno.
Keep in mind, I was born like a couple months later.
Okay, I was 12, but I mean, Bruno
Yes.
won. I think he won with the bear hug, and then Ray Stevens won with his bombs away. I mean, he actually pinned Bruno, and then Ray won the 3rd fall with a count out. And I guess for a while the belt was kind of like, did he win it or didn't he win it? But I mean, just for Bruno, who was in his absolute heyday, to do something to put Ray Stevens over like that, to me speaks volumes of how good Ray Stevens was.
Yeah, no, he still has quite a reputation here in the Bay Area. He was kind of the Ric Flair of Northern California.
Yeah, I mean, I remember him, in the early '80s with the, when he feuded with Snuka in the WWF. But I mean, he was way past his prime then. Still didn't look too bad, but
yeah, absolutely. So while we have a few minutes left here, I wanted to also ask you guys, whatever happened to the concealed foreign object shtick? That is something that just has disappeared, and I miss it because I saw it the other day with Jerry Lawler doing it with Kerry Von Erich, and it's such good shtick, and it's gone by the wayside. Just nobody does.
And who was the best at it?
That's a good question. Your thought.
What are we calling foreign objects here?
Anything from north of the Mason-Dixon line.
Would you count salt?
Yeah.
Salt, yes.
Or my favorite, the green mist.
The green mist for Muta. That's a good call. But I am also thinking the thing that you shove in your trunks, or the thing, Ted DiBiase and the loaded glove. Do you remember that shtick that you would do?
Iron Sheik and the loaded boot.
Well, the Blackjacks had the loaded gloves too.
Yes, the Blackjacks had a loaded glove also. You would have the spoiler sometimes take stuff in the Masked Superstar, put like a little metal plate in their mask and do a headbutt with it. Which again, wouldn't that hurt you just as much?
I was going to say, wouldn't it hurt them just as bad?
I am disgusted that we have not mentioned Canada's greatest athlete.
Oh yeah,
Iron Mike Sharp.
With the well, he said that was always for medical reasons, but then he would shove something into it. I remember seeing him fight Tito Santana in a match live, in San Francisco, where he kept putting stuff in there, and then Tito found it out and then put it in his hand and then punched him. I mean, the roll of quarters.
Baron Mikhail Cicluna was my favorite at concealing, and he always had. I remember one time I went to see him, and it was a roll of dimes, and it actually busted open when he hit the guy. The
dimes are everywhere, and the ref doesn't see it. I love it. That's one of my favorite gimmicks.
That's how Kurt Hennig beat Jerry Lawler for the AWA title.
Yeah, with the roll of quarters.
Sorry, no, Nick Bockwinkel. I apologize.
While he was being suplexed, right? He hit him.
And that was, I think it was Larry Zbyszko who actually ran in and hit Bockwinkel with it. What you're thinking of was actually what I was going to mention as my all-time favorite, somewhat random foreign object, was Randy Macho Man Savage beating Tito Santana for the Intercontinental Championship. Santana is in the middle of suplexing him back into the ring. Savage is upside down mid-suplex, and he pops Santana with a foreign object, and then falls on top of him for the win.
It was a big moment in professional wrestling.
Well, they're kind of bringing that back, though, with Logan Paul with the brass knuckles.
Right. But he doesn't do the shtick, though, where he, sticks it in his trunks, then, punches it, punches a guy with it, then puts it back in the trunks, then, has the ref, go and check him, doesn't find anything, and then he goes quickly out and punches him again. I mean, that was Jerry Lawler was doing that with Kerry Von Erich, and he did it for good 10 minutes worth of ring time. That to sell that kind of a foreign object shtick, it's just not something anyone has any patience for anymore, and it's a sad thing because I thought that was something that was that was what one of the things that like wrestling was all about, especially in the days of kayfabe, when you were thinking that the ref was just too stupid to ever, notice. And especially when my brother and I were younger, we used to watch wrestling and really get into it because, kayfabe in the 70s was still a real thing, and so, you'd just say, ref, you got to check his. No, now he put the thing in the ringside bucket. You're not looking, Oh no, he's got a towel. He's using the towel to choke him out.
Ernie Ladd with his thumb was in a cast pipe for years. I mean, just some injuries that just don't heal, I guess.
Yeah,
Bob Orton.
Same thing.
Greg the Hammer Valentine had that. Remember the shin guard that he would turn around and he would do the figure four.
And then Ronnie Garvin shamelessly copied it.
Yeah,
in his feud, and decided to use a sharpshooter as a finisher, where like the guy would never come in contact with the shin guard.
Yeah, Ronnie Garvin's not someone I ever really. He was, it was such a weird thing that Ronnie Garvin was so successful in a lot of ways because he didn't really have anything that set him apart from all the other wrestlers at the time, other than the stomp and the fact that he would do the punch thing a lot.
He was a tough guy. I mean, I don't know if he really was, but he portrayed himself as a tough guy.
Take a lot of punishment, that's for sure. But I don't think I ever knew anyone that said Ronnie Garvin is their favorite wrestler. I just, and
it's very hard to believe that he's a former NWA World Heavyweight Champion.
But he only held it for like a week and a half, right?
I think he
90
lost
days.
the first defense, didn't he? Or
so what happened is so Flair needed to drop it because at the time there was a possibility that he was going to leave the NWA. This is before he actually did, and they knew that it was going to be a short reign, and I think it was still the NWA, basically went down the roster asking people who would take the reign from Flair, understanding that it would be short and he'd lose it right back. And so they go to Lex Luger, and Lex Luger says, thanks, but no thanks. It's actually a short enough thing that it's going to diminish my credibility. I think Sting might have been hurt at the time, but if he did, he refused. Steamboat refused. So, and they go down till they get to Ronnie Garvin, who at least in NWA terms was a career mid-carder. And he says, oh, hell yeah, I'm going to take it. Because this was going to be his one shot. He was already in his early 40s. And, this is his chance to kind of etch his name in history. And so he took the win, and he was more than happy enough to lose it back to Flair in his first defense 87 days later.
Well, sometimes being a team player pays off.
I would take a David Arquette style reign, frankly.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if no one expected me to take any kind of bumps, but, David Arquette actually did, for that one match that they had him in. He actually did take some relatively solid bumps, but for a lot of people, that was like the death of kayfabe. Like that was the end of kayfabe for if there was ever any doubt, if anyone was at all, teetering on the fence after the Iron Sheik and Hacksaw Jim Duggan got busted driving up the road together, smoking weed in the middle of California.
Arquette was adamant that he didn't want the belt. He was pushed into it, but he actually was and still is a wrestling fan, and he understood that putting the belt on himself would be bad for WCW and for wrestling as a whole.
But Russo couldn't be talked out of it. That's in fact, this brings up another topic. I was listening to Jim Cornette over the he's been a lot of fun to listen to with everything that's going on with Vince McMahon. But he also talked about Bash at the Beach, his review, the Dark Side of the Ring's Bash at the Beach. And man, did he eviscerate Vince Russo. I mean, boy, if there's two human beings that are on this planet that don't like each other, it's Vince Russo and Jim Cornette.
It's because Russo rarely talks about Cornette, but Cornette seems obsessed with Vince Russo.
He absolutely really, like it sounds like if he had one bullet in a gun.
Well, he'll say that he took his dog out for her morning Russo.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, and he wasn't all that kind about Bischoff either. But man, I mean, his like eviscerating of Russo was really like, wow, man, it's entertaining radio, or it's entertaining to listen to while you're cutting the hedges. But it's like, wow, man, that's really a, and I mean, that being said, I was never a big fan of Russo, which is tough because he is a San Francisco Giants fan, like I am. But I have to just say that's just one of those outliers where, just because you love a sports team, you have to give a mulligan to somebody that you wouldn't like. But I can't go back and like Russo, because I think a lot of what Cornette says about him is valid. About how he really was a car wreck of a writer in the wrestling world. What are your guys' thoughts?
He's tried very hard, because I've listened to some of his weekly shows. I think he goes on every Thursday for about a half an hour, and it's almost like that part of him never existed. He doesn't really talk about that very much.
Yeah, I think he feels really badly burned by it. I will admit I'm probably on the wrong side of history on this one. I am actually a bit of a Vince Russo fan. I don't think that we get to the boom of the late 1990s, early 2000s without him. I think that it's completely fair to say that for any company to put sole writing responsibility on his shoulders is probably not a good idea. But I think we've seen that a lot of really creative people who've come into wrestling need some kind of editor behind them. And when Vince Russo had that, he actually did turn out a lot of good stuff. Did he turn out a lot of stuff that wouldn't necessarily be my cup of tea back then, and sure as heck wouldn't be 25 years later? Absolutely. But I think it's also worth mentioning that Russo came into WWE at a time before they had a fully functional writer's room. He was responsible for putting on up to 5 hours of content a week, which is a lot.
It is,
and maintaining. And his philosophy behind booking, right or wrong, was to involve as many different wrestlers and as many different storylines as possible. And I know there's people who would disagree with that. Lance Storm was a really vocal opponent of that. In his mind, you have your main event program and everybody else is just kind of fighting their way up the ladder, and you don't need subsidiary programs. I think that part of what made Russo really effective is that he gave enough thought to what everybody was doing up and down the card, even if it meant his workload increased exponentially. And I got to tell you, if you've ever worked in, and that you guys both likely have a lot more experience than this than I do, but in my limited experience in any kind of creative industry, when you're writing for volume, it's not all going to be brilliant. Yeah, so, did he misfire a lot? Sure. But the stuff that he did that was good, I thought was really good. And I think he's unfairly maligned by the really vicious side of wrestling internet, to the point that it's kind of made him angrier than I would hope somebody would be, given the size and the overall quality of his body of work.
Good counterpoint. Now we have just a couple minutes left. Your thoughts on the Elimination Chamber and the fact that it came on at 2 a.m. in California, so there was absolutely no way I was going to stay up till 2 a.m. to watch that car wreck of a program, and I'm not sure if any of you guys got up.
I got up at 5 here.
Yeah, I hope you didn't get up at 5 a.m.
I did.
You did?
Oh, yeah.
Just to watch it?
Just to watch it, because I had to work and I had to do a home show, and I actually missed the last match. I actually had Peacock on my phone, so I listened to the Rhea Ripley Nia Jax match on my phone on the way to St. Petersburg. But the matches, it's really weird, because the matches themselves, I don't think were that bad. I think the matches are fairly decent. But I thought, like, number one, you're promised a surprise of some sort, and you usually have one. And I really didn't see that at all. And given the fact that The Undertaker was supposedly in Australia, that would have been a great surprise. Didn't have to do anything in the ring necessarily. But I didn't really like the booking of the match in terms of, for example, LA Knight, I think, was the second person eliminated. And I think they really kind of just buried the guy. I had thought, for a few months ago, I thought it was going to be LA Knight and Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. Then I thought, okay, well, at least it's probably going to be LA Knight and Logan Paul at WrestleMania for the U.S. Championship, which could have happened, during the Chamber match, but AJ Styles came in and attacked LA Knight. So now you probably have that for WrestleMania. So now he's not even in contention for a mid-card title. They just really, and he still seems very over with the fans, but I don't know what their mindset is.
Jonathan, your thoughts?
I think that if they're going to run with him, and I think given the fact that he's over 40, I can't really see that they would, given that he's still more of an unproven commodity than other older champions they've kind of brought in, like AJ Styles or Bobby Lashley. But I think he will get there. I think that for whatever reason, they've just really decided to slow play him. In terms of the main event, I'm kind of glad to see if we're heading to Kevin Owens versus Logan Paul. I like that it's at least going to be somewhat of a marquee matchup for Owens. I never get tired of his work. I think Logan Paul is great on the mic and a really good wrestler when he's in there with somebody who can really lead him effectively. And I think Owens is more than capable of doing that.
Sure.
I don't particularly love that the average age of the participants in the men's the men's Elimination Chamber match would have been over 40, just guessing casually. And that there wasn't really an option among them, if we're thinking about who's going to be positioned against Seth Rollins, that we haven't really seen before.
It's a lot of the same stuff.
And we wound up with Drew McIntyre, who I think is doing his best work right now, but that's still a program that we've seen more than once. What I think it all leads to is McIntyre beats Rollins the first night of WrestleMania, probably with some kind of interference, and then Rollins turns around and costs Cody Rhodes the championship against Roman Reigns. So Roman gets to beat Hulk Hogan's record. And we have a program between Rollins and Rhodes, and that leaves McIntyre to go off and be either to be a heel, or I think he might actually wind up getting turned face out of the deal.
Or go to AEW.
I think for me, he's one of the best kinds of heel right now, in that his character is fully justified in what he's thinking and how he's acting, because he has been repeatedly screwed by all of these other factors to this point. So why wouldn't he be mad? And why wouldn't he turn against the audience for supporting the people who've been, actively plotting him against him as a face for the last few years?
Like the Mr. Backlund heel character, because a lot of
Mr. Backlund's one of my all-time favorites, by the way.
But a lot of the things that he said as a heel were
true.
On, right?
Sure. That's what usually the best, work is when it's a shoot. The best work of all is when it's a shoot. Anyway, guys, it's really great to have you on for the show. Why don't you give your plugs for everything? Jonathan, go ahead first.
So I write a column every 2 weeks for slamwrestling.net. It's called Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz. Just recently, I looked at the build as it's starting towards WrestleMania. This week, I am looking at why WWE needs to bring in to headline either WrestleMania 40 or more likely WrestleMania 41 at this point, Jason and Travis Kelce and their lovely valet, Taylor Swift.
Yeah, they should have they should be in a tag match against George Kittle and Deebo Samuel.
I'm taking it further than that. I think that what we need for Cody Rhodes to finish the story is a 6-man match, him and the Kelce brothers against the Bloodline, winner take all.
There you go.
I don't know. George Kittle is a big wrestling fan. I think it'd be unfair to not involve him somehow.
He's been on too many AEW shows.
Oh no, he was in a WrestleMania. George Kittle was at WrestleMania, the one that was here in San Francisco. He clotheslined The Miz. He got out of
everybody clotheslines The Miz.
I know. Thank you. Not enough people do. Anyway, Benny, throw your 2 cents in here.
Yeah, this is going to take a minute here. So I do a true crime show on Mondays. I'm not doing one this week, but a week from Monday will be Son of Sam, David Berkowitz will be our episode. The last one was actually very interesting on Dr. Sam Shepard. I don't know if you remember him, the doctor, convicted murderer. His case got overturned by F. Lee Bailey, and then he wrestled for a bit. He actually invented the mandible claw.
He was the basis for The Fugitive.
Correct, absolutely. So I got that on a week from Monday. Tuesday night on Dan and Benny in the Ring, I actually will be interviewing Renee Koloff, the widow of Ivan Koloff. Looking forward to that. And then I do a show on Thursdays called The 30, which is a wrestling game show, and another show called Wrestling Remembered on Friday, which is just to look back at different things like, best gimmick match, best territory, best manager, things like that. And that's all on the Monty and the Pharaoh YouTube channel. And then also, we mentioned Iron Mike Sharp. I just did a story about him that was released a couple of days ago for the Pro Wrestling Stories website.
It's a great story.
I think, thank you. Mike Sharp, I think, was very, very underrated. And one of those guys that, a lot of these guys came to WWF with like phenomenal credentials, only to be turned into a clown. I mean, Mike Sharp's career pre-WWF was outstanding. Won a number of titles all over the country. You wouldn't know it by how they booked him, but one of my favorite characters of all time.
I think he was the world's loudest wrestler.
Oh yeah.
He also had like strong programs against Bob Backlund and Hulk Hogan.
He did initially, yeah.
Yeah, but then
he did, and then all of a sudden, and the rumor that I've heard is that after the Piper Snuka incident, where Tonga Kid was on Piper's Pit, and he challenged Piper to a match, and Piper said, "Well, you have to beat, I think it was the Executioner, a masked guy first, and then you can wrestle me." And they wanted Sharp to do the job under the hood, and he wouldn't do it. And I think a guy named Frank Savage went up doing it, and apparently his stock with the company just went down after that.
Got to do what Vince says you got to do.
Absolutely.
That's the lesson we've learned. Anyway, guys, thank you for being on the show this week, and we'll have you on again real soon. And have a great rest of the weekend for you, and we'll see you again sometime down the road. Good night, everybody.